Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Daily Flange with Intoxicus Flanging. My name's Graham, and as always, I hope you all remember to bring Tel. Today I hope you remember to bring your economics tells, because we're kind of getting into some gaming and economics kind of territory, as you can probably tell by the title. And we're going to be talking about looks like there's a potential, try that again, it looks like there's a potential price hike going to be coming for video game software with the next gen. And what we got is an announcement that NBA 2K21 is going to cost $69.99, or pretty much $70 USD, which will probably wind up being 90 Canadian. In Canada, we're paying $80 a game, so that'd be probably a $90 game here in Canada instead of 80. And as the question asks in the title, is this a good thing, or is this a bad thing? And well, it might be a little bit mixed here, because there's going to be a lot of people, of course, that are going to be like, oh, we don't want our games to be more expensive and all that. And I got a lot of bit about to say about that reaction, but it's not necessarily a completely good thing either, because there's a bigger picture economically with inflation, which is why really what makes this such a squirrely thing. We'll jump into the articles here, if I can press right hotkey. So we'll start with this one from Polygon, talking about first sign that next gen games might get a price hike with this one. And I'm confident this pricing will be standard for next gen software, and I'm sure PC software will match that pricing. So there is a quote here so 2K game spokesperson gave him a quote. We believe our suggested retail price for NBA 2K1 on next-gen platforms fairly represents the value of what's being offered. Power, speed, and technology that is only possible on new hardware. While we are confident that NBA 2K21 will be a monumental leap forward for the franchise and a standout visual showcase on next-gen consoles, we recognize that it's our responsibility to prove this value to our fans and NBA 2K players. We're looking forward to doing so and can't wait to show it more in the upcoming months to launch. I just noticed I was like rocking a little bit there. Autism thing happens. I try not to do it because it's visually distracting. I just have to mention it because I noticed I was doing it. And that's kind of the regular corporate speak I'd expect. And there are some other reasons that they do mention here that might be part of the reason for this, like the smart delivery system and stuff. So, you buy it and it applies for both consoles, PS4 and PS5, or Xbox Series X and Xbox One X was the previous one. I'm not too familiar with Xbox. I kind of derped. So that could potentially be a reason, because it's almost, from the perspective of previous next-gen console releases, they've not done anything like that. So if they really release it on the next-gen console, you got to buy it again. So they might see that maybe potentially as trying to recoup what they'd perceive as a loss. That could be a factor, but there's other factors, like maybe it is more expensive to develop for the next-gen consoles. But I think really it's more expensive to develop big games in general. And we're going to touch on some articles that talk about that. But there's like 2-year-old articles talking about video game pricing and all that kind of stuff. We're not going to go too deep into them. They're, it's just the kind of thing, sources to be provided for reference. There's interesting points in here. This one is saying it's not good to raise prices. This is 2 years ago, though. I disagree with him, but it's good to have a counterpoint. I can hit the right keys here. So this Business Insider article is really good. I really like this one. This first quote is something I think it's very interesting. The crazy thing about video games being $60 is they've gotten much, much more complicated to make over time, but the price has stayed exactly at $60. If you're buying a new Super Mario game on Nintendo Switch, it's probably going to cost $60. If you're buying the new Call of Duty on the PlayStation 4 or Xbox One, it's probably going to cost $60. That's the base level price. There are special editions, there are limited editions, there are lots of other ways that the video game companies have come up with for you to spend more than $60 on video games. but the base level entry level price for a blockbuster video game on a console is now $60. And they talk about a period of time previously where games were $40 to $80, but that's not accounting for inflation. If we account for inflation, we're talking like $150 to $200 in 2020 prices. And once we start factoring inflation into this gets to be a much, much more interesting discussion. So we're going to jump ahead. I was going to jump into this aspect. So we've got this this infographics floated around over the past couple years or so. I think it came up when the Nintendo Switch came out, maybe, because there's a little bit of like, yeah, about the price. So I think it was maybe the Nintendo Switch coming out that may have prompted this, or I forget what prompted it exactly. I guess this one's only a year old, but there was a debate going on that kind of prompted this infographic into existence, and we'll just go straight to the infographic. So what we're looking at here, and my face is kind of in the way of one of them, that's PlayStation 2. So we're gonna, you'll only be able to, where's a better spot I can put me, where I'm not blocking the image so much. There's not really a good place where, okay, we can block those ones because there's no real inflation going on with those. So we go back and we see what these consoles are worth in, well, I guess this would be for inflation like a year or two ago, and that year or two will matter. Not maybe so significantly, but inflation is constant. Well, constant in that it constantly occurs, and it's always happening. And, well, I should explain what inflation actually is, because a lot of people think of inflation as prices rising. Prices rising is a side effect of inflation. Inflation is your money becoming worth less. And just stop and think about that for a second. Your money constantly loses value. And also think about this. Wages do not increase to match that loss in value of money. So you're constantly, the wages you paid that are a constant number are constantly worth less. And you constantly have less spending power for the same wages. And that's actually why we have locked in at $60. Because from our perspective, we keep getting the same amount of money paid to us. We can't afford more because we're not getting the wages to match inflation to make the game price increases actually with inflation, just counting inflation alone and nothing else. Game price increases to account with inflation don't make sense. And if we take a bigger picture view, shit's getting less expensive, and it explains why things tend to be cheaper, break easy, more shortcuts than there used to be. This might be controversial. I'd love to talk with some economists who actually know what they're doing. There's a lot of economists out there that are full of fucking shit. Economics is a fucking crazy thing to get into because you realize really quickly a lot of it's crap. And I don't want to get into that much more. There's a lot of valid economics, but there's a lot of shit that's just like theories that we've come up with that actually don't prove to be that valid in practice. Like, I could go on about this kind of stuff. It's something that's wound up just fascinating me, and I'd love to talk to some very legitimate I can't say that word. Economists. I don't know. Something's weird about me saying the word. I'll just ignore that. But yeah, when it comes to economics, there's a lot of people who aren't as legit as others. So you'll get a lot of mixed opinions. It's a very interesting thing to get into. But what we want to focus on here is more inflation as a factor in the whole bigger picture of what's going on with game pricing and why it has to increase. It needs to. And that it's not increased for so long is actually a big fucking problem. But it's an even bigger problem that because of inflation and wages not keeping pace with inflation, like it just becomes even more of a problem because the increase in price they need to do to offset the increase in cost of production, we're just not accepting of. And people like I forget which article said it, but they said, at a certain point, if you raise the price, people just won't buy it. Some people won't. I mean, I'm different. I'll buy it. I'll just change my budgeting. But because I understand the bigger picture economics, or at least believe I understand it, I could be flawed in my understanding, of course. But assuming my understanding is at least mostly correct, it's just a fucked up situation, and it's easy to say, okay, well, make wages keep pace with inflation. easier said than done. Wages should be keep pace with inflation. Absolutely, that should be no questions asked. But with the meta of everything now, I mean, just increasing minimum wage to a closer to a living wage, and still not even a minimum living wage at $15 an hour, huge deal where don't want to get too off in a tangent here, but that was a big deal where a lot of businesses were like, oh my god, we can't afford this and all this, and it's like they had such a short-sighted perspective because they didn't realize that now that people have more money to spend, you're going to get more business. So there might be a rough transition, but give it just a little bit of time and it should, if it's done properly, actually wind up evening out, because now people have more disposable income and now they're spending that money. And that's the thing, economics is all connected. It's not just isolated. And that's why it becomes so tricky and complicated so often to understand these things. And also why a bigger picture viewpoint is needed alongside a zoomed in, detailed viewpoint. And I've said this multiple times in my content. I see lots of detailed, zoomed in viewpoints, and I don't believe there's enough bigger picture, zoomed out viewpoints to counterbalance that. And that's part of the purpose of toxic flanging. Anyways, got a bit tangential here. So back to inflation and video game prices and consoles. So we look at inflation, we'll see, you know, Nintendo NES at 1986 was $200 in 1986 currency, but now that's like $400. That's pretty much the same price as a Nintendo Switch, at least Canadian. Because yeah, what's a Nintendo Switch in American dollars? It's closer to 300 or 350. In Canada, it's like $400 for a Nintendo Switch. I just don't remember the numbers offhand. It might be 450. Here, let's just look it up quick. What's a Nintendo Switch in Canada at retail? Actually, I won't say the retail price. Nintendo Switch retail price. Yeah, 400 in Canada. So it's like 300 for you guys. Let's just double check that. I'm just having a derp on the numbers. I should know them better. Just having a brain fart. Yeah, $299. Ooh, misclicking. Back to here. So yeah, it's an NES would actually be more expensive at retail pricing than a Nintendo Switch in US dollars, and all this is in US dollars. So that's some interesting perspective, because it makes you realize our shit's actually got cheaper. If we went the other way and converted our dollars to 1986 dollars, it'd be pretty fucking crazy. It'd be insanely inexpensive in 1986 dollars. Fuck it, let's pull the inflation calculator out. What's a $3.99 Switch in 1986 dollars? US, not Bank of Canada. So if in 2020, then in 1986, $3.99.99. Whoa, that's not proper. 167.86. It'd be cheaper significantly. So let's take a modern game price, $59.99. $25. So 70 or $69.99. I should screen cap this and post it. $29.37. So if we go back to when the NES was, and accounting for inflation, let me move my head back. Yeah, a $70 game would be $30 in 1986 dollars. But does that actually matter? And that's the thing. Does that actually matter? Because yes, that is some interesting perspective that helps understand the bigger picture, but when it comes to right now, the reality of the situation, that may not really matter so much. Because we can't go back in time and buy a Nintendo Switch game at $30 in 1986 dollars. But it helps us understand. What it does do is help us understand the bigger picture and why we are where we are, and why the situation's actually much more messed up than I think many people realize. Because this is just bad economics. What's going on? It's not good in the long run. It is not healthy. This is a really good article too. Just trying to switch up what we're looking at so it's not the same thing all the time. Oh yes, the IGN article here. They've got less of a visual, well, it's still a visual aid, but just less like actual pictures of the consoles, but same kind of deal, helping us understand inflation rates and all that. And so basically, if we were just talking about inflation alone and no other factors, and just saying games should go with inflation and console prices should go with inflation, it'd be thousands of dollars for a console and hundreds of dollars for a video game. And if we also think about now to add to that, and kind of skewing away from that isolated hypothetical I threw out there, now think about where we talked earlier about how much more expensive it's got for video game production. It's millions of dollars now. It's absolutely, it's very intense. It's basically game production costs are up there with blockbuster movies now, and there are more people buying games. There's a lot of numbers and data I'd love to see that I'm not sure how available it is. But it'd be interesting to see, to help put this in more perspective, like how much more people are buying games and game consoles now compared to back then. Because gaming's blown up, there's more people buying it. And this kind of, well, to me, this kind of winds up coming to, what about microtransactions? If they're charging more for games, doesn't that mean they can stop with microtransactions? Yes and no, some but not all. Some, yes. Some will still try to do microtransactions. There are some that are going to be still dependent on microtransactions. That's mostly like free-to-play games and stuff. And it kind of depends on the model. It kind of depends on the company. I see a company like EA, even though they seem to be backing away from stuff like microtransactions just because of the bad PR it's become for them. But I see certain companies still leaning into microtransactions regardless, just because they're fucking greedy like that. Or at least that's my perception of some of those companies. There are other companies that, I hope you guys didn't hear that background noise, other companies that hopefully will be like, oh shit, now that we can actually get a more effective amount of money for our games, now we can back away from microtransactions. We don't need to do that so much. But the thing with microtransactions is part of the reason they exist isn't just game prices have stayed at the same point while inflation's risen and game production costs has risen. It's also, there's another factor that's just been a problem with how game sales work and all that, is without something like microtransactions to provide a continuous income, you wind up with like this massive burst of income when the thing first releases, and it's like YouTube income. Other creators would understand this. I'm not at the point to experience it, but lots of people have talked about it, where when it first released, you get that big burst, and that's really the main thing. Then there's a slowly, gradually diminishing trickle over time. So when it comes to making that next game, having the funds to be able to do that can become very tenuous and sketchy for a lot of companies. And as much as all the other factors, that's the reason for microtransactions to exist, is just to be able to have a continuous income stream, be able to have the funds to be able to make the next big game. Because that's, until microtransactions, that was a big problem for game designers, being like, well, we made our game, we made our money, but like, you know, we paid our owed cost for making the last game, but do we have enough money still to be able to fund the next game? So they kind of wind up always behind. And that's the thing that might keep microtransactions going, but I would hope maybe they improve, they become less, they're not so ridiculous, and they actually become micro, because they're not very fucking micro right now. So I made a tweet where I think I just phrased it poorly when I was responding to something Spawnwave posted, and I think I just could have phrased that tweet better. But I think a rise in game pricing will enable companies to have less excuses for microtransactions, and it'll give us more position to be like, do you guys really need to be doing this? Can you guys really justify this? So I think it'll I think it'll be a positive benefit in the meta of microtransactions in gaming, in the economics of gaming, to have an overall rise in game prices. But will it outright stop microtransactions? No, there's too many more factors and variables going on to just, for that one fact, just the rise in prices to stop microtransactions outright. That's not going to happen. It's just, there's just so many more variables and factors going on with all that. And yeah, the whole situation is quite nuanced and complex. And I think it's inevitable. I think it has to happen eventually, or we're going to see worse and more microtransactions in an attempt to compensate for the lack of income they're getting from direct game sales. And so, yeah, I think overall, this will be mostly beneficial, but I think there's also a negative aspect to the game pricing rise too, and that goes back to where I was talking about wages don't increase with inflation. Unless our wages match pace with inflation, it's going to be not pleasant to accommodate for that, even just a $10 price raise, which isn't, $10 isn't a lot of money in 2020. $10 used to be a decently significant amount of money. Like, we used to talk about, it used to be talked about the value of a dollar. Well, nowadays it's the value of $10, because $1 ain't shit. You can't even buy a fucking can of pop or soda, whatever you call it, where you are, soda pop, whatever. Different places call it different things. You can't even buy a can of pop for $1 now, and it used to be like 50 cents for a fucking can of pop. Or I think when I was a kid, when I first remember cans of pop in a vending machine, I think it was $0.25. And just think about that, vending machine prices. Just that a can of Coke in a fucking vending machine has gone from $0.25 to like $2 fucking in my lifetime. Holy fuck. That is insane. I need a sip of tea, just because, like, inflation bothers me. It's a problem with our economics as a whole. There needs to be something done about it, or at least do things like make sure wages increase with inflation, because the thing is, at the end of the day, with the way inflation works, we're always behind. It's so hard to catch up when money's worth less, but your wages stay the same, and then prices increase while your wages stay the same. So think about that. Your money's worth less constantly, prices increase occasionally to offset inflation, and other factors too. It's not just inflation why prices rise, but prices rise because of inflation. And again, I have to reiterate, inflation is not the rising of prices, it's the devaluing of your money and your money losing value, which causes direct and indirect effect of prices rising. And yeah, so we've got kind of these three components. Wages not keeping pace with inflation, your money's worth less. And let's just switch back to the recording thing. I should have done that sooner. Yeah, so where was I? Prices increasing occasionally, wages stagnant, not increasing in pace with inflation, and don't increase enough when they do have the occasional increases, and your money's worth less. So with that combination of factors, excluding all the other factors, just those three factors alone, kind of fucked. Like, it's hard for anyone who's not at like a high, like, let's say 6-figure plus income level to really navigate this kind of stuff, just because of the nature of our modern economics. And so this whole situation is just really sticky and complicated, because there's a bigger picture outside of gaming Flange going on here that affects the economics of gaming in ways that gaming just has to deal with, because it's not like the gaming industry can be like, well, we're demanding that wages increase with inflation. We can well, I should take that back. The gaming industry could take a stand and be like, we're going to decide that all gaming industry wages keep exact pace with inflation, and come up with a system for it. So like, on a monthly, maybe quarterly, or, so on a regular basis, they reevaluate wages and inflation and make increase accordingly and set a good example. Hypothetically, that'd be amazing, but that wouldn't necessarily, it might have a ripple effect that benefits everyone. It might not. It might actually, that's the thing. If not everyone else follows suit, it'll wind up kicking them in the ass, because economics are like that. I don't have enough time to go too deep into that. We're hitting up on our time limits and stuff. So it's another topic where I've got so much to say. I'll probably make more videos on this topic in the future, speaking more about it. Um, I'm somewhat tempted to maybe do an extra flange going more, but maybe not today. But yeah, let me know what you think. Do you think this is good? Do you think this is bad? Do you have any ideas or data or anything that complements or contradicts what I was talking about? Yeah, let me know. Flange that up in the comments or in Twitch, or yeah, or the live streams on Twitch or Twitter or wherever you want to find me. There's a Facebook group now too, the Intoxicus Flanging Towel Rack, if you're more into Facebook. Uh, the Discord's coming soon. It's pretty much set up. I just got to finalize it. So yeah, there are all sorts of places to have this discussion with me and flange up a good discussion. I'm super curious what you think and what your opinion is, and if anyone has any data or facts or information out there that complements or contradicts, flange that all up. And with that, if you enjoyed this content, hit that subscribe button, should be on that side or something. And make sure to hit that bell for notifications. One of these days I'll hit 1,000 subs so I can have the cards like everyone else where it just pops up with subscribe and it's just much smoother and easier. And also, if you like this video, give me that thumbs up. If you didn't, give me that thumbs down. But if you give me that thumbs down, please offer some constructive feedback and criticism to help me improve and do better. But if you do so, also please be respectful. Any commentary that's insulting or attacking or anything like that will not be tolerated and deleted. So of course, be respectful, please. And also please be specific. Just vague, unspecific criticism and feedback is just can be hard to take action on. So please try and be more specific as much as is possible. And before we wrap it all up, I always feel like I'm forgetting something. So I'm sure I'm forgetting something I should say. Anyways, I'm remembering to thank our Patreon supporters, and also the Valve Index GoFundMe donors. And yeah, as I've been saying, going to be taking a break from streaming for a couple weeks. There's an unfortunate defect with the Valve Index. Defects happen. Team support's been really cool about it. It seems like a known issue. The way they responded when I actually got more specific about it, they're just like, oh yeah, RMA, flange it up. So today's probably going to be the last VR stream for a couple weeks, or well, more than a couple weeks, because it could take like up to a month for the whole RMA to do, because they have to ship there, they have to do their thing, takes some time to ship back and all that stuff. So I might wind up resuming flat screen streaming before VR streaming, and we'll have to kind of work with that as it flanges. But I do want to take a couple weeks break from streaming so I can focus more on the YouTube content here. There's a lot of YouTube content I've planned and just not followed through on because stuff getting in the way, and I want to get stuff out of the way, and I want to do that by giving myself more time to focus on YouTube content by not having Twitch streaming take up significant portions of my time. And there's mental preparedness and stuff also for Twitch streaming that takes up a bit of time. Like, I kind of got to have some time to kind of like get myself in the right mind state and shit before I start Twitch streaming, and that winds up taking time. So, I'm trying to like figure this all out, figure out like my workflow and how this all flanges. And so, things are going to be changing up a bit until I really get this figured out. And also on that note, I'm going to be switching back to the regular flange format instead of the daily flange. So it'll be 2 or 3 videos a week called the regular flange instead of the daily flange. The daily flange, because it's the same issue I wound up with before, where it feels like I'm oversaturating, and then I wind up coming up with topics that are kind of mediocre just to fill in a gap when there's nothing that good or anything that I find that interesting. So go back to the regular flange format and retire the daily flange format, at least temporarily. I do imagine I'll return to the daily flange once I become a bigger creator, because there are a lot of virtues to doing something like that. But I think just at this time, it's not optimal for growing my content. So yeah, with all that, we're pretty much right on the hard time limit. Thanks everyone for watching and supporting. Have a good one, and remember to bring a towel while I hopefully get this outro not a mess.